What's going on, guys? My co-host Micah is running a few minutes behind. The cosplay and mental health had me kind of, just had me inspired. So I think I'm gonna try and do this entire one as Art the Clown pretending to be a podcast host. So we'll see how long, because these glasses are very, very uncomfortable. So we will see how long I can actually last in this realm of things. But how's everybody doing tonight? If you guys are just joining us, we'll jump into what that's high praise is in just a few minutes. We're closing out the network list here. Give me 1 second. My co-host is calling me. If you guys are just joining us, we are doing a 24-hour stream. We have had a lot of great content, a lot of great creators. We have had cosplay mental health. So shout out to Moody, Vision, Charlie Rocket, Jay, Jay. My brain is fried at this point. Jay Johnson, Jay Jackson, one of the two. Megamind's assistant, apprentice, sorry. Sam, Smash B cosplay, Saint of Pine Hills, Abyss Gazing, and Brilliant but Lazy all here. Zambies is up next, Collateral Gaming, Collateral Cinema, LJ the Padawan. We have a bunch of great stuff here for you. And I'm joined right now by my co-host, Mr. VH Zest.
What's up?
What's up?
I'm drinking milk. It's not a good look. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hello, beautiful. All right. Well, let's kick this off properly. Welcome to that's high praise.
Oh man.
So close. It's hard to do it live. This is a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I'm your co-host VH Zest.
I'm your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia. What is going on, my friends?
Yo, we're out here. We're hanging out. It's a good day. The weather has finally gotten mild, which has always been my favorite Taco Bell sauce. And we're living. How are you, Josh?
I'm very tired. I'm still here. I'm good. I'm here to talk about my favorite actor of all time. Nicolas Cage.
That's right. So, what's on the agenda, Josh? I know we had an agenda last night, and then, as it would have it, the Walt Disney Company did not honor that agenda.
Yeah, I have no idea what we are going to be doing. Originally, the original plan was to talk about National Treasure tonight. That's not happening because last night, my day kind of went off on the rails. So yeah. So we've been doing this podcast now for about 2.5, 3 years now. And I just had something actually pop up on my Facebook memories today that said 2 years ago on this day, we released our episode for Outcast. And so like I don't know, I want to talk about that for a few minutes. And just kind of like, I don't know, like what are some of your favorite episodes that like we've produced? Because most people might not have ever listened or even known of our podcast before. And so we have to give them a starting point.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring up the old Let me bring up the old Spotify. I know right off the bat, I don't know if it's my favorite, and it feels like, I don't know, it feels like a tall task to, just label one as more, as my favorite over the rest. And I don't want to do that based on movie. I'd almost rather do it based on the actual podcast, but there's probably going to be a mix of both. I loved, the one that comes to mind is I absolutely loved the Teen Titans Go to the Movie podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's a good place to start. If you've never listened to this podcast before, I wouldn't recommend it as a starting point. But I have a great bias toward the Teen Titans. I love the Teen Titans. And it was our first, which I guess this is our most recent, live podcast.
Yep.
And we had a small, very, very participating crowd. And they were awesome. It was super, super freaking cool. It was at a little con in Richmond, at an old JCPenney's. And it was great. There are people like shouting out their favorite Nick Cage movie. People like would walk by and comment, and that was it. That was the whole interaction. And they're on the podcast just because they walked by once. That one was an absolute ton of fun. Pig was. I remember more about the lead up to the podcast than I remember the podcast itself.
Sure.
But, we watched that movie in theaters. I saw it twice in 72 hours in theaters. And I remember we got in the car and we were like, we have to talk about anything but what we just saw. Because we just wanted the podcast to be as fresh as it could be. Because that movie was just so... I'm going to say this. It's going to sound negative. I don't mean it negative. The movie was very heavy. And I don't, maybe weighty is a better phrase. I don't mean it in a negative way. It was just like, there was a lot of substance to that movie, and we knew we wanted we knew we wanted the interaction to be as raw as it could be right on the podcast. The Rock was pretty fun. Arsenal was not.
I mean, we don't have to go into every kind of starting point right now. I do want to jump in and comment. So also, the shout out to Heroes Assemble, which was the con that we did Teen Titans Go to the Movies at. That was it was one of the first cons we ever did relocating in Richmond. And it was one of the first cons that you and I ever did. And I couldn't remember if Statesville was before that one, so I guess you're right.
Yep.
So it was the first one, but one of the things that I really loved about that particular one was shout out to Max. First off,
Max, dude.
But I also liked the interaction. Like when you do a podcast and you're sitting down with somebody, it's a great feeling, especially if you're communicating with them the way that I feel like you have really good chemistry, like Mark and I with Abyss Gazing have really good chemistry. But when you get to a room full of strangers and they're matching your hype level, it's another just straight up otherworldly feeling. And what I liked about that con in particular was that it was this tiny little JCPenney's, which I mean it was a decent sized con, but they actually had microphones, whereas that you could travel with. They had portable mics, and so we could actually go out into the audience and have them be a part of the podcast, or we could go to a vendor and have them be a part of the podcast. So if you guys are just joining us, I have the comment that's left up on the screen right now. But what is your favorite Nicolas Cage movie? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to talk about Nicolas Cage with you. But yeah, I remember Pig's another great one. I think those are probably the two episodes that I'm really proud of as a podcaster when it comes to stuff like that. Because Pig, I just remember coming home and like processing all my thoughts, and the car ride home was so awkward because we were trying so hard not to like spoil the podcast for each other, and like it was like word vomit. As soon as the microphones were recording, we were like, all right, intro, and then right into it. And it's one of the heaviest discussions, but I, doing a podcast network and funding a nonprofit, founding a nonprofit like Victims and Villains, like obviously I have a huge passion for mental health, and Pig's a great example, and I think it's a great representation of who we are as podcasters and mental health advocates, because that movie is not only one of Cage's best performances, not only one of his favorite films, but I mean, just the messages and the themes of like grief and sorrow, and like also like the ability of like forgiveness as well, are so deeply woven into that. And like you think about like it's a character study, and you're kind of watching how this character is unfolding in his mental health. And like I've seen that movie probably 5 or 6 times now, and I can't watch that movie without crying.
Yeah, dude. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I can think of another movie that just displays so well and in such a raw way, like the notion of loving your enemy without it being an overstatement, without it being like any sort of like having any sort of like religious stint to it or stilt to it or anything like that. It's just, you said you cry every time you watch that movie. I do too. And it's always the dinner scene. It's just like, his character. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of his character. Starts with an R. Rob, thank you. Rob's character like remembers every meal that he ever prepared, and like it just the absolute like care and intimacy, just like selflessness, like just displayed in that scene, just absolutely incredible. Like wow. It's so good. And I don't want to do anything to like spoil that movie at all for anybody who hasn't seen it. Like I would spoil every movie in the world before I'd spoil that one.
Yeah.
Like, like it's just something else. I don't know.
I think also like it's a great representation, because like we've talked about this on the podcast several times, but like several people are like, Nicolas Cage is like this insane, crazy actor because they think of like a few handful of scenes from like Face Off or Vampire's Kiss or
A, B, C, D.
Exactly. Like that is their entire picture of who Nicolas Cage is, who he can be as an actor. And they never really look at him as like this actor that can have range or can grow. And one of the things that I think like, I love about being a Nicolas Cage podcaster is deconstructing a lot of those like mannerisms, myths, like Nicolas Cage can't be more. And I think Pig's a great example. It's a great starting point. Like if you want to see like a really moving, profound performance, that's where you would go. Like that's the reason that I think Nicolas Cage works as well as he does. And like I know like another one that's a little bit quirky that we covered. It's in an earlier episode, but actually ended up being one of my favorite Nicolas Cage movies that we've ever done, and that ended up actually. I think you're kind of like so on it, but that's adaptation.
Yeah. I'm so on the movie. I'm not so on his performance. I think his performance is awesome. But yeah, the movie itself is just not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But no, incredible performance.
Because in that one too, like he's doing a dual performance, so you're kind of getting. If you guys don't know what it's about, basically, It is about a writer that is struggling to kind of top his his previous film was like this like huge breakout, and he's basically trying to kind of top his previous one, and yeah. Nicolas Cage just has a great role. Like, what other films have we what other podcasts have we done? Where you think you can kind of like point to like his like range as an actor for people that might not necessarily be a fan.
Yeah, his range, man. It's funny. Like, I can think of Nicolas Cage movies. I can't always think of like, oh wait, have we actually covered that movie? And we were gonna do National Treasure tonight, and I think National Treasure, in a lot of ways is like kind of middle of the road as far as his acting goes. Not that he acts poorly at all, but just that like he's not flamboyant or crazy, but it does show that he can act with a lot of conviction. He can be very steady. He can play that sort of character. I think Red Rock West comes to mind, of just being, again, a very steady character with a lot of conviction, and he gets himself wrapped up in something that he didn't mean to be wrapped up in, and it's very much like a dramatic piece. Even more than that, I would say, Bringing Out the Dead, his Martin Scorsese film, absolutely like very serious role. He plays like a night shift EMS, and he's going through partner after partner. And to some extent it's funny, but on a very real sense, it's also kind of like him losing and finding himself over and over again. And I think that one's really great. I can't remember if we've done this or not. I don't think that we have, but I think Raising Arizona, personally, I like I said, I don't think we've done it, but like, that to me is like, I like some Nick Cage movies prior to that movie. It's an early one for his, but like, to me, that feels like, where Nicolas Cage, it almost feels like that's where his career begins, like really begins, where he has kind of his own voice and he stands on his own 2 feet. But it's a precursor to all of those zany, roles that he kind of gets typecasted for.
Sure.
But it's Coen Brothers. It's kind of a Western. It's kind of a comedy. And he's just really solid. He plays the character he does with a lot of conviction, even though it is kind of like a silly movie. He just really owns the whole thing. Army of One, I think, is another one, where it's like you watch the movie and it's like, this is not the kind of person that Nicolas Cage is at all. At all. And like, it is a wild and funny character, but it's also like it's not a wild and funny character trying to be wild and funny. He's just like, he's somebody you laugh at, but they don't think of themselves as a joke. I thought that movie is silly and a lot of fun, but definitely very much like, and some people would probably disagree, but I think that movie is kind of off color for him a little bit, in a good way. This one isn't like really that crazy. I think it's kind of middle of the road. He's more just plays like a steady action guy, but I'm going to bring up The Rock simply because like I love, and I will always love, that it was Nick Cage's idea for Stanley's character not to swear at all. And the best line, so let's cut the chit chat, a-hole. It's just like absolutely fits. It just delivers the crap out of it, with no less conviction than he would have had he been swearing. I love that movie, and I love that like that was his decision to play the character that way. And it's so effective that you don't notice it.
Yeah. The Rock's a really interesting like movie to consider when you talk about like the landscape of his career at that time, because like he was really like around that time, he was like really playing these like really outlandish characters. Like you look at like Castor Troy from the aforementioned Face Off.
Totally.
You know, Laserdisc right here.
Yeah.
And
I got it on tape and DVD.
You know, I have it on tape too. Because I don't boys and girls, if you remember Laserdiscs, let me know in the comments. Yeah, it's like because that's a really eccentric character, like Con Air to an extent, like is also an eccentric character. A lot of these characters that were like action heroes at the time, he was playing them like really like straight, you know, like out of this world. Whereas like his character, The Rock's like a really like kind of like really calm, really mellow guy. Like, yes, he's got some of those like mannerisms, but like compared to the rest of the action he was playing, like even like you look at like National Treasure is another great example. Like around that time, Gone in 60 Seconds, like The Rock was one of those movies that he was playing very, very stealthily. Like, yeah. It was just very like, it was a very interesting thing. But like, you know, one of my introduction, because I also had like seen like a small, you know, handful of Cage films prior to this, and my first one, and still to this day my favorite Nicolas Cage film, is 8mm, which we did a movie on. And 8mm is probably one of those other episodes that like I'm really proud of as a podcaster, not as a Nicolas Cage podcaster, but as a podcaster period. I do this for 7 years, and this episode is like probably like easily top 5 favorite podcasts I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, dude. I think about that episode. Like, I think about that episode, and I think about like, again, that movie is kind of also heavy, but it's heavy like in kind of a different way than Pig is. It's not emotionally heavy; it's like thematically heavy. And like, if we were ever to cover a Nick Cage movie again, I would pick that one before any other movie.
That means the world to me.
Yeah.
So if you guys don't know, like, you brought up like bringing out the dead too. 1999 was such a weird year for Cage because he had these 2 films that flew like really under the radar. And like, what's crazy about Bringing Out the Dead specifically is that it's a Martin Scorsese film.
Yeah.
For one, it's Cage, it's got John Goodman in it. Like, I mean, the cast is stacked, but yeah, like Ving Rhames, like, and then like 8mm is it's a Joel Schumacher movie, and it was actually his follow-up to Batman and Robin, but it also features like a really young like Joaquin Phoenix. I want to say Vincent D'Onofrio's in it too, but I don't think that's right. I know there's like no, it's Tony Soprano. I can't remember the guy's name. James Gandolfini's in it. That's the guy's name. But I mean, it's got like both films have like really incredible casts, and like they just kind of flew under the radar. That's really what I like about doing a Nicolas Cage podcast, is finding those like little like hidden gems. Like one of the movies that we're going to be covering next month in October is a movie called Pay the Ghost. And it's a fun film. Like, I mean, it's a film that deals with grief and it deals with these heavy things. But like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's a really solid film.
Yeah. I'm excited for that one too. I have not seen that one before. I'm excited for it because like Cage, like the horror that he's done has always been iconic, but he hasn't done a lot of horror in the grand scheme of his career. Hasn't done a ton of horror, but the horror that he's done goes down in fame or infamy, whichever. You know, so I'm really stoked about that one being a horror movie of his that I've never seen. I'm really stoked about that one. Yeah, I've loved something else I've loved about this podcast that I'm sure, Josh, that you've kind of come to appreciate too, is that like there have been movies that we've watched that were terrible
that are not worthy of high praise,
except for Cage. Like Cage is the one part where it's like, oh yeah, well he was awesome. Like he's like almost pirate-esque character in what was it, Outcast or whatever. The Hayden Christensen movie. Movie is terrible. And then Cage is in it for like 10 to 20 minutes and he's awesome. And then that's it. And then the movie's terrible again. You know, or like the movie we did most recently. Man, I can't even remember the name of it. What?
Inconceivable.
Inconceivable. That's right. Movie is awful. Not even cast poorly. In fact, there's a wrestler in it, but like, it's just not good. But then Cage is fine. I mean, he's not great, but he doesn't bring anything like remarkable to the table. But he's fine. He's just acting like it's a job.
Also, I want to bring up like an under the radar kind of pick for this one, and that would be 2019's Primal, which we covered in 2021.
Yeah.
It's one of the last episodes. It is overall, it's a really terrible movie, but it's so much fun.
Yeah,
like quality wise, like it's one of those movies that is so bad that it actually ends up being a great movie.
Yeah. The theme is really fun. His character is really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there are like other films that like, you know, the concept of our show is like we basically are trying to like cover everything Nicolas Cage has ever done and determine if it's really worthy of high praise or not.
Yeah.
And like I mean, we've done movies that, like you said, like we've done movies that are like legitimately like fantastic. Like 8mm, Pig, Teen Titans Go to the Movies, like these ones that we've talked about. We've also done like ones that are like middle of the road, like Snake Eyes. Like we were both pretty kind of neutral on that. And then you have movies that are like that are just straight up terrible. Like Outcast. So like my question is for you is like, you know, what are movies that like what are Nicolas Cage movies that people should avoid in your opinion and in your journey?
Avoid Inconceivable. You should avoid Inconceivable. You should avoid man, there are so many, and some of them just have unremarkable names that like I know the movie and I can't remember the name. But there was the one with like the brothers, and he reprises that role that he played in like the early 90s.
I actually like I'm on the website. I'm on our like official website right now, and which you guys can click in the links below to check it out, or check us out wherever you guys get your podcast from. But the movie you are talking about is Arsenal, and that was such a painful movie to watch.
Terrible movie. Do not watch that movie. Don't do it. What's that movie when he's like in Mexico and he's like in that bar and he like vamps toward the end and it's like the only decent part of the movie?
Oh, yeah, that's also another sluggish one because we covered it a couple months later, and it's called Kill Chain from 2019.
Kill Chain. Don't watch it. Do not watch Kill Chain. I don't care what kind of time you have on your hands. Just watch Unbearable Weight twice. Like don't watch Kill Chain. It's terrible. I need to go to our master list here.
So while you're going to that master list, I will say this, that there's the movie that I will, because I agree with the two that you've said so far. You know, the three: Inconceivable, Kill Chain, and man, what's the other one you said?
Inconceivable, Kill Chain,
and Arsenal. So the one that I will tell you to avoid, outside of those, I will not tell you to avoid. I will tell you it is probably one of the trippiest movies we've ever done. And yes, we've covered Willy's Wonderland, which is a great nugget, but Between Worlds is a movie you hate it, but I'm like, this movie, it might be the shortest episode we've ever produced, but also
it's not.
What's the shortest one we've done?
The shortest one is Trapped in Paradise.
Oh God, Trapped in Paradise was awful.
Yeah, but it's worth one to watch. It doesn't have that many Christmas movies. It's worth one watch.
He does it. And what's crazy about that one is that cast also is stacked. So it's him, John Lovitz, and Dana Carvey.
Yeah.
And I don't know how with that cast you end up that bad.
Yeah. It's not good. It's so bad. Yeah, and then there are some movies that like that were kind of polarizing or middle of the road. Like you mentioned this one earlier, but like you love adaptation. I'm here or there about the movie, but I love Cage's performance. And then we were kind of the opposite in a way on Captain Corelli's Mandolin. I think Captain Corelli's Mandolin is a wonderful Nicolas Cage movie. I don't like war movies, and I somehow managed to like it. My wife and I sat here and just goggled through the whole movie. Like, how is this? How are we enjoying this much? Josh really didn't like it, but back to your really early question, about like movies that show his depth. I think that's a decent one. He maintains an accent the whole movie. He actually learned how to play some mandolin for the part. It's a love story, which he doesn't do a ton of, and when he does, they go under the radar because of Moonstruck, which is a good movie. I really like that one. But there's a ton like that, and that's honestly like that's the career that I think that Cage is known for. Is he's known for his polarizing nature. It's part of why we love him. It's part of why this podcast, I think, works very well. Is because you're going to have movies inevitably that Josh and I disagree on.
Yeah.
You're going to have movies inevitably that we love that you hate. As fans, things like that.
One of my favorite films that you brought up earlier that I really want to expand upon was Red Rock West. Red Rock West is the next part of the conversation that I want to talk about is of it being like that was the biggest surprise. Like I am that, and like I will also say The Old Way. The Old Way was one of the films we covered earlier this year.
Yep, first movie of the year. Yep,
it was actually the last in-person film we did podcast we did because you moved shortly after.
Yep.
But to me, like I hate westerns. And I really had a lot of fun with that film. I thought the acting was good, the pacing was great. Like it was a really fun time, but the Red Rock West has actually ended up being like one of my top 5 favorite Cage films. And it's a Western noir. Some people consider it to be his actual first Western and not The Old Way. It's not a true Western in that regard. But I think it's like it's one of his best performances, and it's one of the most it's without a doubt one of his most hidden performances, the performances that fly under the radar in films, because we talked about it in the episode, but it is incredibly hard to find a copy of that movie. I actually had to import the movie from like another country. Micah was lucky enough to like find a copy on eBay, but it is like incredibly hard to find that movie.
Yeah. It is hard to find it. But we do recommend it. That's a really good one. Probably the biggest thing of note about that one, if you care about this kind of thing, which I try not to, but inevitably fail sometimes, is that its Rotten Tomatoes score is tied for the highest of any of his films. It's tied with Pig, which if you've seen Pig, you understand. If you haven't seen Pig and you're listening to this, you know how like the high praise that we give it. If you've heard any Cage interview he's done since the movie, he almost always brings it up. And Red Rock West maintains the same score on Rotten Tomatoes as that movie does. It is a Western noir. I don't know that it's for everybody, especially if your idea of Nicolas Cage is more along the lines of Gone in 60 Seconds, Con Air, Face Off, National Treasure. If you have more of the action hero in your head when you think of Nicolas Cage, it may be whatever to you. And I can understand that. But yeah, it's definitely a quality film. I loved we don't need to rehash it here. We did an episode about it. Go listen to that episode. There's some really cool trivia about that movie. Like that one's a fascinating case for in his career for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I will say, and I brought this up in the episode, is like I feel like everyone kind of did their own thing during the pandemic. I got really big into David Lynch, and this was like kind of like an amalgamation of like David Lynch at that era without being directed by David Lynch, but somehow still feeling kind of like a Lynchian film. Because like, so the movie stars Nicolas Cage, who was in Wild at Heart in 1990, directed by Lynch. After that, you also have Dennis Hopper, who was in Blue Velvet in 87, I believe. And then you have Laura Flynn Boyle in this movie, who was also in Twin Peaks from, but I think that I really liked about this, just, I don't want to rehash it either. It balances tension really well, but like also is able to, yeah, I don't know, man. And another movie that I want to bring up is actually one that we just recently covered, and that would be Peggy Sue Got Married. We would talk about like, Nicolas Cage is like the definition of a character actor, and I feel like every role that he steps into, he really makes his own. We're starting to see pictures come out of Toronto International Film Festival right now about Dream Scenario, which is his new horror comedy dramedy coming out of in November with A24. It's produced by Ari Aster. But I'm so excited for that one. But like it's one of those things that like he really made that decision to like be there and like be present for that one. I absolutely love that. And I think it's one of those things too that like Nicolas Cage as an actor, like it really kind of goes to like showcase that like literally every role that he's doing, he's trying to make it as diverse and different from the role that preceded it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love to, if you get to, my wife and I actually were talking about this earlier. There's a new season of Hot Ones that starts on the 21st in 6 days. We were looking at the hot sauce lineup for it today, which is something we do not need to, but will inevitably spend our money on. And we already have way too many hot sauces, and we have finished way too few bottles, and we plan on replacing the bottle that we finished. But nevertheless, season 21 of Hot Ones starts 21 or 22, something like that. Starts on the 21st, and we're just like, we have bated breath because like it's been over 20 seasons of that incredible interview show where people have been on multiple times. And Nicolas Cage is yet to be on. And then like a season or two ago, actually may have been longer than that, but it didn't feel that long ago. What's his name? What's his name? Freaking, you know what I'm talking about. Mandalorian.
Pedro Pascal.
Thank you. Pedro Pascal was on it and just absolutely raved about Nicolas Cage. And of course he had like some pointed Nicolas Cage questions that were asked because of Unbearable Weight having come out. So we're just like really holding our breath for like, maybe this is the season we'll finally get Nick Cage on that show. But despite that fact, like, if you have not, please go take the opportunity to look at Cage, to like view Cage's like TV and interview stuff. I'm not talking about the history of swear words. As exciting and as cool as that was, he was actually kind of a small feature on that show. But like, I'm talking about like, he did like a Hollywood Roundtable interview on YouTube that was just astounding and wonderful. And there were so many, it's a round table, so there's no head, which I think is the purpose. But like, there were so many times it almost felt like he was at the head of that table. He did a 60-minute interview, which was really fascinating and fun and stuff. And he's done a lot of things like that. I really encourage everybody, go watch things like that. Not just because he's he's funny because he is funny. But like he just approaches acting in his like themes and the way that he talks so different than I've ever seen anybody else do. He does not like to be called an actor. He prefers the term thespian. And he goes into why in that roundtable read and things like that. And it's really fascinating and yeah, super cool. And then while you're kind of in that frame of mind, look up, and I can't stress this enough, look up his AMA on Reddit. Like there were people like asking him questions and he was answering them. And there were people on there who were like, wait, do I like Nicolas Cage? Wait, is this the best actor? Like there were people who were like, this is the best AMA, period. People were just absolutely floored and impressed just at his level of tact and things like that. The way he approached answering his questions and stuff. This was shortly after the release of Unbearable Weight, so it's still fairly new. Yeah, stuff like that every one of those things is a gem. Highly recommend anything like that.
I know we've talked about it a little bit earlier, and I do just want to echo you. Like I think you spoke really well. Like Nicolas Cage in interviews is a real treat. But I want to ask this question with the last 15 minutes we have left here, is like with this one in particular, like we're a little over 30 episodes into the podcast. We've done other podcasting outside of Nicolas Cage, but like which of his movies do you think like embraces the conversation of mental health the best? I feel like Pig's a really easy answer, but like before we kind of shifted into it, I would argue Peggy Sue is also worth bringing up in that one. Vengeance is a great one.
A Love Story,
yeah,
would probably be my pick. But I don't think there's not a blanket answer, and there shouldn't be. Cage has multiple movies that address grief, and they do so in vastly different ways, even within kind of the horror genre alone. So there's that, like movies like Pig, for example. But yeah, I was really impressed by Vengeance and Love Story. I was really impressed by 8mm. And 8mm may not, for some people, have maybe the mental health aspect, an impact as other movies or for other people, but I think it gets into some nitty gritty things that like movies in general don't want to talk about.
Sure.
And I think like it's just important in general. Maybe that gets a little more into the like addiction sort of side of mental health and of victims of what, we do. But I think that one's really good. I think there's something to be said of Guarding Tess to some extent. I mean, it's mostly kind of a comedy and stuff, but like, I still think there's a little more there than people like think about and realize. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a little bit here and there in a lot of them, even some of the comedies, because a lot of his comedies, especially in the 80s, were like Peggy Sue or Fast Times or maybe Raising Arizona to some extent. They were almost coming of age stories in a way where like people were having to deal like physically and / mentally and emotionally deal with problems at hand, problems of divorce, problems of poverty, problems of, just high school, things like that. Valley Girl, and I think like any sort of like coming of age style movie, even if it doesn't like speak to you on a mental health level, I think it's very relatable at least, and there's value in that at least itself.
Yeah, the one of the ones that you brought up, like grief being a subject that is like almost a constant in his some of his performances, like kind of like the one that we just did, that we both, neither one of us liked it, but the process of like Inconceivable, the whole thing about Inconceivable is that it's this couple that is essentially mourning the loss of a stillborn child after really pursuing after the subject of wanting to be a parent. Then you have like
Yeah.
The Old Way, which is another great example. But like I think like for those, because I'm so passionate about this movie, but like I want to bring up 8mm again, just to kind of clarify something that you said, is like that movie addresses like snuff films, it addresses sex trafficking, human trafficking,
Yeah.
these really
And it
important
did it in
topics.
99.
Yeah, like it's
Yeah.
like really progressive. Like I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of like organizations that are like out front about it. Like right now, like Exodus Cry and a couple other great organizations. But like that is one of those things that like it's a conversation and it's kind of worth exploring, because I feel like Eddie Wood, especially like when you talk about pornography, anyone can log on to a website and just be like, oh, Pornhub, or
Right.
uh whatever tube site you want to use. But like when you kind of get to see a movie like that, you can kind of see it at that time, just kind of like the underground market and like how vast something like that empire really is. And then now in 2023, that empire is just essentially switched from where it was to in person to now digitally. And
Yeah.
I think a film like that is like worth having conversations about and worth analyzing,
Yeah.
because but it gets lost in the noise of a lot of his like major Hollywood films, because it's 2 years after Face Off, it's a year after The Rock, but it's a year before uh Family Man, and it's a year before Gone in 60 Seconds. So it kind of like flies under the radar in his
Yeah.
discography.
Just lost in the
Uh
show so much.
yeah, and I would like also say too that like another one that I think kind of is like a one of his like more, I don't say important, because I feel like that's giving it like a little bit too much credit. But like Vengeance, a Love Story, kind of deals with something that's a very similar themes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That definitely flies under the radar as well. Um, we brought this earlier, but Army of One is this crazy story that's like in history about like a
Yeah.
guy that essentially like he's going to kill Bin Laden, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He
Like
went
like
over. He did like. It was like double-digit amount of times he like funded his own way over there and tried to like find and kill Bin Laden. It's a real story.
Yeah, and like I'm honestly surprised in like almost 50 minutes of doing this podcast that we haven't brought this up. But
Yeah.
like one of our favorite films that we've done was one of the most surprising ones, is the 1994 film It Could Happen to You.
Yeah.
Is one of the most wholesome films you will ever see. I promise and I guarantee that to you.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful story about, kindness, gentleness, the unexpected nature of humanity, and like
Just generosity.
generosity, like, and
Yeah.
I think and like how that impacts your mental health. But like also like on the flip side of that story affects like showcases like how greed can affect your mental health,
Yeah.
and like how greed affects a divorce, or how generosity can lead to a divorce as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That movie's really good. I remember. I will say, like, I've watched it multiple times. I've watched it since we did the podcast, and I remember loving it. Like when we watched it together and we did the podcast. I will say that movie, like, it is a little too short, and I never say that, but like, it has this really dramatic segment, and then it gets really, really good in like 5 minutes, and that's it. And so it almost is like it gets like super dramatic, and there's not like a whole lot of time of like payoff after like the really heavy dramatic part. But it is nonetheless a really wholesome movie. And like we talk about this all the time, but like it's funny how in the '90s how many movies Cage did where he just played a really wholesome freaking character. And it was just I don't know. I don't know that anybody else was really doing that, at least in the same way, but like it was just awesome. Absolutely delightful. Um,
What
fun kind of rom-com.
Yeah, what I think is crazy is like I don't think we really realized it as Nicolas Cage fans until earlier this year when he did Renfield. But Nicolas Cage like almost exclusively plays like nice guys.
Yes.
Like aside from like Castor Troy and like what's the Renfield, and then like you haven't seen it yet, but also like Sympathy for the Devil. Those are like three standout bad guy performances that he has, and almost everything else that he's done has been like a good guy or like guys with good intentions. Deadfall and Arsenal would also fall into that conversation. Deadfall I would recommend way over Arsenal. Deadfall is like just a crazy bonkers he just plays a crazy bonkers thing. So thanks for the sub, LJ the Padawan. If you guys are night owls, you guys can catch him modding. He will be playing Mortal Kombat 1 at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, taking a part of our graveyard shift. Always appreciate that about you, LJ. But yeah, I really like Deadfall. Deadfall is like one of his like his zanier roles.
Yeah, I've seen, because Arsenal was terrible, but I know he kind of like it was like a spiritual sequel, and he like
So weird.
reprised his role somehow. Yeah, I haven't seen Deadfall. I do want to. Yeah. I think a movie too that we'd be remiss not to talk about, having covered it on the podcast, and we've mentioned it only in passing this episode, but Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. You know, I remember like people have known for a few years now that we do this podcast, that like I co-host a Nicolas Cage podcast, and like anybody I tell that to, like most people kind of chuckle. Some people get like really genuinely excited and curious, but most people just kind of like chuckle or think it's funny, or they like they'll talk to me about it for a minute and that's it. Dude, when Unbearable Weight was like, when the trailer was in theaters and stuff, everybody and their mom just like came out of the woodworks to talk to me, and we're just like, Micah, do you know about this movie? And I was just like, yes, I do. I'm very excited. And like everybody, I don't watch trailers. So like I hadn't even seen the trailer and people were trying to talk to me. But that movie, I've watched it so many times. Especially for how new it is, I've watched it a particular amount of times. My mother-in-law came to visit us a few weeks ago, watched it with her. We went to see my wife's family, and so my father-in-law at his house this past weekend, watched it with him, and they both separately were just like, this is amazing, like this is so funny. Yeah, and I think that movie is an absolute freaking blast. I think that movie is, in a lot of ways, it is a tribute to Nicolas Cage and Nicolas Cage fans. But that movie is a tribute to freaking movies, man. Like that movie it really, for me anyway, it did a lot to revitalize how much I love movies and how fun movies can be while being good, but not like without having to take them too seriously. Like I got really bogged down by like the superhero thing for a few years.
Yeah.
And that movie was like really, really revitalizing for me personally. And Cage has a couple movies like that, Sorcerer's Apprentice, National Treasure, that are just like, man, maybe these aren't like films, in like the I don't know, the colloquial sense, like where it's like, oh, this is of quality. But like they're movies that just they remind me how much I just love watching a movie.
What's crazy, like we only have a few minutes left here. So
Yeah.
what's crazy to me is like when most people like talk about Nicolas Cage, knowing that I also host this podcast, is they always talk to me about like the bigger ones like National Treasure, Gone in 60 Seconds, Con Air, The Rock. And Nicolas Cage is like one of those actors. Like that's why I love and appreciate Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. My wife hates Nicolas Cage and loves that movie. It's one of those movies that like it's a comfort film. I said that in our review last year.
Yeah.
When we covered it, but like also at the same time, like I just genuinely like love how that movie embraces and is like also feels like deep cuts. Like you could tell it's made by like a real Nicolas Cage fan.
Yeah.
I would have low key really loved it if like John Travolta made a cameo in it. And it
Same.
was like did the whole face off like thing, but like I think it's such I think it's a great place to like leave us. Like if you guys haven't watched the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, cannot recommend it enough.
No.
I have the poster right here above my desk. I see it every time I podcast. I absolutely adore that movie. It's a movie that's a commentary on Cage's like career, but then like slowly progresses into it. So like an actual movie. So
yeah,
that is gonna do it for us on this episode of That's High Praise. Hopefully you guys had fun talking to us about Nicolas Cage. Zambies is up next, followed by Collateral Gaming, Collateral Cinema, LJ the Padawan, Devon Struthers, and we have a whole bunch of other talented streamers coming to watch us. So we have the links in the show notes below where you guys can check it. Make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button below, and if you guys can do it, also support and hit the donate links as well. Micah, thanks for being a part of this, man.
Always.
All right. All right. Well, I'm gonna leave off with a comment before I hand things over to Zambies. LJ the Padawan being on at 2 a.m. tonight says his favorite movie is Lord of War. It's his favorite Cage movie. So
wow,
we've not covered that one yet. We're coming for it though.
Yeah.
So well, until next time, remember to keep on caging.